Paul-Henri Damiba didn't lose power because of a coup. He lost protection. And in today's West Africa, once protection disappears, outcomes move fast. That's what this story is really about. For decades, West Africa politics followed an unwritten rule. If you lose power, exile means safety. You might lose position, you might lose influence, but you didn't lose your freedom. That rule shaped how leaders behave, how coup unfolds, and how mistakes were quietly managed. It also shaped how accountability was avoided. If leader fails, the priority was stability, not resolution. So leaders were removed, relocated, and forgotten. That system worked as long as instability stays contained. But containment stopped working. Paul-Henri Damiba believed that the old rules still applies. After being removed from power in Burkina Faso, he left the country believing distance would buy him time. He believed geographic still functioned as installation. What he didn't understand was that the rule he was relying on no longer existed. Most people don't notice this shift until they are already irreversible. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humiliation. It wasn't about optics. It was about accountability. Across West Africa, a new understanding has emerged. Political failure is no longer quietly exported. It's resolved. Instability is no longer someone else's problem. It's treated as a regional liability. Damiba wasn't returned because he fled. He returned because exile was no longer recognized as immunity. That is the shift. And when rules change quietly, the people still operating under old assumptions are the ones who get caught. What made the Damiba case instructive is not what he did, but what he misread. Damiba believed or behaved as if the political environment that removed him was temporary. He acted like time was on his side, but time stopped working. That's why, that way in West Africa, the region is no longer patient with unresolved instability. In early decades, removing the leader was often enough. Today, removal without accountability is seen as unfinished business. And that's the difference. Damiba miscalculated because he assumed political transmission was still negotiated quietly behind the scene. They aren't. They are being finalized. And when the system moved from negotiation to enforcement, personal assumption stopped mattering. This kind of miscalculation happened when leaders confused silence with safety. Silence doesn't mean forgiveness. It means alignment. It's being decided elsewhere. But by the time outcomes become visible, the decision was already being made. If this kind of analysis keeps you seeing power, or if this kind of analysis helps you See power before it moves. Subscribe. The Damiba return wasn't dramatic. There was no speeches, no international speculations or spectacle, no media theaters. And that's exactly why it matters. Quiet enforcement is more powerful than public punishment. By allowing the Damiba to believe he was safe and then removed that safety, West Africa sent a message without announcing it. The message was simple. If you destabilize the state, you don't get to disappear. That message isn't just for former leaders. It is for the current ones too. But there's another layer to this that is most outside observer missed. West Africa didn't just change its rules. It stopped explaining them. In the past, every major political move came with justification, press statements, diplomatic language. Briefing meant to reassure outsiders that era is ending. Not because explanation is hostile, but because explanation stopped working. Explaining invite interference. Explaining slow decision. Explaining turn internal problem into external leverage. So the region stop and start adapting. Instead of arguing legitimacy, it being enforced outcome. The neighbor return reflect that shift. There was no campaign, no convince in the world, no debate, just alignment and then execution. That silence is not confusion. It is confidence. And confidence change how power operate. This is the kind of shift you only catch if you're watching pattern, not headlines. Once regions stop explaining themselves, the real audience is no longer external. It's internal. It's leadership watching careful. It's officers calculating risk. It's political actors still assuming they can step outside the system and re-enter lately without consequence. That assumption is now dangerous. What West Africa is signaling that authority is no longer temporary and accountability is no longer optional. This won't be the last this rule shows itself. It doesn't create instability, it reduces it. Because predictability replaces improvisations. And predictability is what stabilizes region. It's important to understand why this didn't happen 10 years ago. In the past, West Africa states were fragmented. A former leader could move across borders and disappear into diplomatic gray space. There was always a reason to delay, always a reason to avoid confrontation. That hesitation is gone. Today, region operates with sheer understanding. Instability is one country spilled into the next. So the calculation changed. Protecting failed leaders no longer preserve peace. It prolonged disorder. The neighbor wasn't returned because Burkina Faso demanded it loudly. He was returned because the region no longer benefits from pretending mistake didn't exist. And that is a very different mindset. And it leads to another uncomfortable but unavoidable conclusion. Once exile stops guaranteeing safety, there is no quiet reset. There is no return to the old system. Every future leader now operates under different assumption. That knowledge alone reshapes behavior. It makes hesitation costly. It makes improvisation dangerous. And it makes miscalculations visible. That's why, in this moment, matters beyond Burkina Faso. Because the system don't change when people talk about them. They change when consequences become predictability. That's why, and that's what West Africa is building. When regions stop explaining themselves, it usually means decisions are already being enforced. The Damiba case tells us West Africa is finished negotiating with instability. That doesn't mean perfection. It means direction, and direction matters more than noise. Subscribe. These rules are changing, and they are still being changed.